Imagine you have just taken the throne after a great catastrophe that reshaped Europe. In your hands are an army, taxes, tax collectors, and the power to decide what will be called the official history. Chroniclers write what you dictate to them, while the discontented remain silent. But unwelcome news arises in reports. Beneath your new cities lie hundreds of kilometers of tunnels, multi-layered bunkers, and perfect engineering systems. These colossal networks do not belong to you. You do not know how to construct them, and most importantly, they prove that a civilization once existed here with resources and power that you can only dream of. This visible evidence of your weakness is the perfect hiding place for any rebellion. One decree from you, and these cyclopean structures lose their true purpose. You declare them to be beer cellars, merchants' warehouses, and quarries, forcing chroniclers to record this for posterity. What will you choose? To acknowledge before the people that you reside on the ruins of a great empire and do not control what lies beneath your feet? Or to drape a veil of mundane boredom over these gigantic subterranean spaces so that no one dares to seek the truth within? Now let's see how this has been concealed in real history. Imagine a German city in the 14th century. Narrow streets, wooden houses, the smell of smoke and manure. People carry water from wells. Bread is baked over an open fire, and at night by candlelight. Everything is modest, everything within means, everything at the level of survival. And in this very city, someone makes the decision. It is necessary to excavate a multi-level underground complex beneath each house with perfect engineering symmetry, secret aqueducts, and passages that connect dozens of private properties into a single network. The official explanation for this construction has remained unchanged for centuries. Beer. The city authorities wanted to store beer. If you have accepted this as a normal explanation right now, I understand you. This is exactly what it is meant for. But let's check. Not in words, but in numbers. Because when you look at what lies beneath German cities and compare it with the official explanations, something stops adding up. Not in just one place, in 4, across Germany, with different explanations, but the same result. The scale far exceeds the stated need. Every time, without exception. Let's start with the most well-known example and the most innocent explanation. On November 11, 1380, the City Council of Nuremberg enacted a decree. Anyone who brews beer is required to have their own cellar. The dimensions are strictly 10 by 16 feet in depth and width. This seems like typical medieval legislation, a private matter for each brewer. But what follows does not fit into the official narrative at all. First of all, the cellars were not built on just one level. The system in Nuremberg extended down to 4 tiers, reaching up to 20 meters underground. That's roughly the height of a 6-story building, only going downward. Secondly, the city hall strictly punished those whose columns in the lower level did not align with the supports of the upper one. Just think about it. City officials would go underground and check the alignment of the load-bearing columns in private cellars. For beer. For beer that is stored in barrels, which cares nothing for architectural symmetry. The total area of the system beneath Nuremberg amounted to 25,000 square meters. It is a unified engineering structure with vertical axial symmetry, an architectural principle used in the construction of bridges and aqueducts rather than in digging beer cellars. This is not how things are built when everyone does it for themselves. This is how things are built when one person sets the standard for all. The most obvious objection here is that the town hall simply wanted order. Okay, let's assume that. Then answer one question. Why impose order in private cellars if that is private property? In medieval Nuremberg, there were no state standards for forges, bakeries, or stables, only for the underground network. That's the signature. And beneath the beer layers, another layer was discovered. Narrow passages, 60 centimeters wide, carved out under foreign plots. Not for beer, not for storage. This is the Hochwasserleitung, a system of aqueducts that discreetly distributed water throughout the city. While the ordinary citizens of Nuremberg hauled water from wells in buckets, someone was overseeing an underground water intake, of which most residents were unaware. This network remained classified until the mid-17th century, nearly 300 years. 300 years of a secret aqueduct beneath the city, which was officially built for beer cellars. Now ask yourself another question. How did this secrecy work at all? Corridors that are 60 centimeters wide are not an industrial highway. Only one person can fit in sideways. This means that only a strictly limited circle of people knew about the existence of the aqueducts. Those who were laying them under other people's backyards worked unnoticed by the owners of those yards. And this means one thing. Construction was carried out under someone's direct orders, with authorities that were placed above the right to private property. In a medieval city, few had such authority. Consider yet another fact that is usually recalled in a different context. During World War II, at a depth of 24 meters, the Nuremberg system was equipped as a climate-controlled storage facility for works of art. Paintings by Dürer, golden relics, imperial regalia, Kunstbunker. This required not a single extra meter of excavation. The halls, ventilation shafts, stable temperature, insulation from vibrations, everything was already in place. Everything already existed. The 600-year-old system assumed a new function without any modifications. If we are indeed facing a collection of private beer cellars built haphazardly over several centuries, how can we explain that they have formed a cohesive space suitable for the storage of artworks with precise microclimate control? A random accumulation of private basements does not yield such a result. A unified design does. Note that this speaks to the nature of the system itself. A specialized object, a beer cellar, a salt warehouse, an abrasive quarry, cannot, after 600 years, accommodate, without modification, the values of an empire, and then twice as many people as its calculated capacity suggests. It is too tailored to a single task. Such functionality only exists in objects with a fundamentally excessive supply of versatility. Objects designed not for a specific need, but for a range of needs. Someone in the 14th century built a system near Nuremberg that would be useful under any scenario: commercial, military, sanitary, civilian. This is not a brewer thinking about the next batch of lager. This is an engineer thinking about the next century. In 1945, the system sheltered 40,000 people during bombings. The calculated capacity, according to official data, is between 15 and 20,000, half as many. This means that the system was originally designed for volumes that cannot be explained by the population of a specific neighborhood or the needs of breweries. The scale was inherent from the start. It was not completed at the last moment. It was fundamentally built into the project. Remember this number: 4 levels, 20 meters, 25,000 square meters, secret water conduits 300 years old. This is Nuremberg, a major imperial city, one of the richest in Germany. Perhaps this scale is explained precisely by the size and significance of Nuremberg. Maybe it's an exception rather than the rule. So, let's see what happens when we move to a city that is hundreds of times smaller and has no objective reasons to have anything like this at all. Oppenheim, Rhineland-Palatinate, a small town on the Rhine, at its peak holding 3,000 to 4,000 residents. Today, it's just a bit more. If you've never heard of it, that's perfectly fine. Oppenheim is not known for anything special, except for one thing. Beneath this city, 40 kilometers of tunnels have been documented. Open the map of Oppenheim. Look at the area of the city perimeter. Now, imagine that you need to lay 40 kilometers of tunnels beneath this spot on the map, across 5 levels, in loess soil, without modern machinery. 40 kilometers is the distance from Oppenheim to Mainz. This is not a basement. This is an underground city, of which the above-ground part is merely a thin decoration on top. Official explanation: merchants hid their goods. In the Middle Ages, there was a so-called staple right. A merchant passing through a city was required to put their goods up for sale. To circumvent this obligation, traders hid their cargo underground. Sounds logical, until you start thinking. The staple law required placing goods on the market. It did not require constructing an underground highway spanning 40 kilometers. To evade tax, a single cellar beneath a house or one concealed room was enough. There was no need for 5 levels and tunnels that could traverse the entire city without surfacing. This is not the logistics of a merchant hiding a barrel of wine. This is the infrastructure of movement. One point worth noting is that the ceilings of the lower levels were reinforced by Saxon miners who were brought in specifically for the task. It was a professional mining operation in a city that had never had any mines. The official history does not clarify where a small town along the Rhine got the funds to hire such specialists. Look at another point. In the year 1689, French troops burned Oppenheim to the ground. The above-ground city was destroyed. Houses were burned. Streets lay empty. When the city began to be rebuilt, new buildings were erected without reference to the old foundations. Simply put, the above-ground layout of the city changed completely. But the underground did not. The tunnels remained, and new houses rose above the old network, not aligning with it in any way. Today, beneath Oppenheim exists an underground map of the city that does not match the above-ground layout at any point. 2 cities, one visible, the other invisible. The above-ground city has been reconstructed several times. The underground one, never. This is, in itself, a fact. If the tunnels truly belonged to specific houses and served particular establishments, they would have lost their purpose after the change in the city plan. They would have been abandoned. Instead, they continued to be used, because their function did not depend on what was above. In 1983, a police car sank in the center of Oppenheim. The asphalt simply vanished beneath the wheels. Beneath the road lay a forgotten emptiness, a tunnel that none of the city's residents knew about anymore. This means that the system is so vast that its own inhabitants have ceased to understand what lies beneath their feet. Now let's calculate literally. 40 kilometers of tunnels with an average width of 1.5 meters and a height of 2 meters amounts to about 120,000 cubic meters of excavated soil. Where did that earth go? In a small town, it's impossible to discreetly relocate mountains of loess. There are no documented dumps around Oppenheim. 120,000 cubic meters of soil have vanished into history as quietly as the tunnels themselves. Official science hasn't even raised this question. And one more detail. The temperature in the lower tiers is 17 degrees. This is abnormally warm for a dungeon. In Nuremberg, it ranges from 8 to 12. Most German systems are similar. Cold is needed for storing beer. 17 degrees is not a refrigerator. It serves a different function, which the official version prefers not to mention. Let's consider yet another argument that is often overlooked. Over the last 700 years, Oppenheim has burned, been rebuilt, changed plans, changed power, and changed its economy. The above-ground city has been different a number of times. The underground, however, has not. The fire of 1689 scorched everything visible. New buildings have risen in new locations, yet beneath them lies a network that survived both the fire and the renovations, as well as centuries of oblivion. It waited. It was not destroyed. It was not buried. It simply ceased to align with what was above. This is not a sign of a well-constructed economic object. Economic entities perish along with the economy they serve. This is a sign of something designed independently of what happens on the surface. Two objects, two cities of different scales, and in both, the systems exceed the stated requirements by several times. In Nuremberg, architectural precision and secret aqueducts. In Oppenheim, the scale of a metropolis beneath a town with a village population. One might say these are extreme cases, but there is a third object, and in it, the official version collapses not due to scale or depth. It collapses due to a simple engineering calculation that anyone can conduct themselves. Moreover, this time it is not about tunnels. It concerns what was found within them. Bamberg, Upper Franconia, a city with 8 hills, famous for its churches and breweries. Beneath this city lies nearly 12 kilometers of tunnels in Kuiper sandstone. The official purpose, the extraction of cleaning sand. Bamberger Scheuersand is a high-quality abrasive for cleaning floors, copper, and brass. This is a real historical fact, with the first documented mention dating back to the year 1487. But here's a question that the official version prefers not to ask. Why go 70 meters deep for sand extraction? 70 meters. That's the height of a 20-story building. Downwards. With a pickaxe. In the 14th to 15th century. Each meter of depth represents the volume of extracted rock that needs to be brought to the surface. At 70 meters, the ground pressure is such that the reinforcement of tunnels requires serious engineering solutions. Typical extraction of construction abrasives occurs in quarries, at most in shallow shafts. No one in the world goes down 70 meters just to sell floor cleaning powder. At first glance, it seems that the price of the matter is a costly item, which suggests it was worth the investment. But then, look at what has been found inside these tunnels. In one of the chambers at a great depth, human remains have been discovered, dated to the 15th century. Judging by their location and context, this is related to the epidemics of the plague. The underground facility was used as a quarantine isolator. The city's sanitary gateway is invisible from the outside, inaccessible to random individuals. Stop here. Quarantine chambers at a depth of 70 meters in the abrasive quarry. This is not a secondary use of an empty basement. It indicates that within the system there were areas with controlled access, places where people could be isolated without the possibility of exiting on their own. Ask the question differently. Who in a medieval city had the right to send people down to a depth of 70 meters and lock them up there? Not to prison, not to a monastery. Underground, in chambers of which the urban population was unaware. This is not a commercial privilege or a church right. It is something with a different level of power over the lives and movements of people. Next, more. In 1944 and 45, the tunnels beneath the hill of Stephansberg became a production site for the Bosch factory. They manufactured electrical equipment for military aviation there. To this day, traces of machinery and electrical wiring are visible on the walls. Industrial production at a depth that was designed for the extraction of abrasives in the 14th century. 700 years later, the state found these volumes sufficient for serious business once again. This is not a coincidence. It is the hallmark of a system that is repeatedly reused, precisely because it was originally designed to handle loads exceeding its declared function. There is one important craft detail here. In the 14th to 15th century, the cost of mining increased exponentially with depth. 15 meters, one price. 70 meters, a different level of expenses, a different level of risk, a different organization of work. The miners of Saxony and Bohemia who worked in silver mines knew this better than anyone else. The margin on the sale of abrasive sand would never cover such costs. This means that someone financed this work through a different line of expenses, not through trade. Another fact to note from Bamberg is the name of the hill Kaulberg, which is associated with a significant part of the tunnels. The name derives from words meaning pit or cellar. It is a marker toponym. The name was established for the area before the first written documents regarding sand extraction appeared. The city remembered that something was beneath this hill long before it was recorded. If you think that Nuremberg is just complicated breweries, Offenheim is enterprising merchants, and Bamberg is an expensive yet explicable sand business, then we must accept that all these discrepancies are independent coincidences in different cities, in different centuries, with different explanations. 3 coincidences leaning in one direction. All right, let's move further west. Mendig, a small town in the Mayen-Koblenz area. Beneath it, there are no tunnels in sandstone and no passages in loess. Beneath it, basalt halls in the solidified lava of a volcano that is 200,000 years old. The area of voids is almost 3 square kilometers, 390 football fields under the town. at a depth of 32 meters, 153 steps down. The official history. First, basalt was extracted here for millstones. Then, starting in 1843, the halls were favored by brewers. 28 breweries used them as warehouses. Basalt is a good material for millstones, that's true. Beer stored well there, that's true too. But 3 square kilometers of voids in volcanic rock is a volume that cannot be explained by either millstones or beer. Now for something important. How were these halls constructed? The only quality control tool during the laying was the sound of a hammer on stone. If the strike produced a dull tone, everything is normal, the column bears the load. If it produced a ringing sound, there's a risk of collapse. No calculations, no load drawings, no measuring equipment, just the ear of the worker. And yet, there was not a single documented collapse during the extraction period. Not one. In a system where 32 meters of basalt loom above, spanning 3 square kilometers, with galleries continuously expanding. This is not luck. Luck runs out after the first collapse. Several centuries without a single catastrophe, in conditions where a mistake would mean the destruction of an entire neighborhood. This is either phenomenal skill or working with material that was already partially empty before mining began. Make a simple calculation. 32 meters of basalt overhead is not just depth. It is pressure of about 80 tons per square meter. An error in the thickness of the supporting column here would mean not just a crack in the warehouse, it would mean the collapse of the entire block above. Houses, streets, people. Every decision about how much rock to leave in the column was a decision about how many lives depended on it. And all this without blueprints, without calculations, just the sound of a hammer on stone. Those who worked in these halls did not work as craftsmen digging a cellar. They worked as engineers who already know the maximum load of the system in advance. Otherwise, it would have collapsed a long time ago. But it hasn't collapsed, not once. Across 3 square kilometers, over several centuries of work. Look at the detail that is usually mentioned in passing. 160 vertical shafts led to the Mendig halls, emerging directly into the courtyards of residential houses and the backyards of outbuildings. 160 points of exit to the surface. This is not the ventilation of a beer warehouse. This is an extensive transportation network that allowed the movement of people and goods beneath the city, completely bypassing the above-ground roads, checkpoints, and prying eyes. Every courtyard in Mendig was a potential entrance to the underground city. Now, think about what this means for medieval logistics. In any European city, the movement of goods was controlled through gates. Each entry point was a customs post, a tax, an accounting. 160 underground exits into residential courtyards. That's 160 points where cargo surfaced within the city, completely bypassing the gates. For which goods this made sense is up to each person to decide. But this is not beer logistics. Beer has no reason to circumvent the city gates. The Vingatsberg volcano, from which these halls were carved in lava, last erupted approximately 200,000 years ago. Over this time, the basalt has become a monolith. People began to extract it here during the Celtic and Roman eras, using open-pit methods from the surface. The transition to underground mining occurred much later. However, by that time, surface basalt had not been depleted. Therefore, the reason for moving deeper was not a lack of material, but something else. It involved a need for space underground, rather than just rock at the surface. Meanwhile, the basalt halls preserved traces of old brick rails, guides for barrels. From the very beginning, the underground spaces were designed for transportation, not just storage. This is an important technical detail. Rails for barrels are laid during the construction phase, not afterward. This means that the person who made the decision on how to build these halls already knew that barrels would be rolled on them. They were designing a transport corridor, not simply selecting rock for millstones. Now look at all four cities together, and notice one detail that is easy to miss when analyzing them separately. In all four cases, different materials. Nuremberg, Berg sandstone. Oppenheim, Löss. Bamberg, Kuiper sandstone. Mendig, volcanic basalt. Different regions, different geology, different tools and drilling methods, but everywhere the same result: a system with a reserve of power that the official function does not demand. This could not have arisen by chance at four independent points. Randomness does not provide a stable pattern. Now another angle. All four systems have survived the surface cities. Nuremberg burned. Oppenheim was completely destroyed in 1689. Bamberg was rebuilt multiple times, and Mendig changed functions several times over the century. Surface cities perished and were reborn. The underground ones endured. This is not a characteristic of a well-built warehouse. It is a characteristic of infrastructure designed for events that make surface life impossible. Ask a straightforward question. What should have existed in the city to necessitate a system with autonomous water intake, parallel movement corridors, and a capacity twice that of the calculated requirement? What kind of life was intended underground if there were shafts leading from residential courtyards? Wells were excavated at great depths, and architectural symmetry was maintained across four tiers. A brewer with a barrel is not the answer to this question. And one more question, which is the hardest to answer with a simple explanation. Who in medieval Europe possessed the technical knowledge, political power, and financial resources to simultaneously create underground infrastructures in multiple cities, while attributing it all to the private initiatives of brewers and merchants? Nuremberg is in Bavaria. Oppenheim is in Rhineland-Palatinate. Bamberg is in Upper Franconia. Mendig is once again in the Rhineland, a different region, different rulers, a different historical context, no single jurisdiction, yet the same algorithm. These are different cities, different eras, different materials, but the same algorithm. There is an official explanation, and it doesn't match the scale. Every time, without exceptions, 4 times in a row. Look only at the dates of the first documented evidence. Nuremberg, 1380. Oppenheim, the 1400s. Bamberg, 1487. This is not synchronous. These are different moments. But the systems, judging by the marks left by tools on the walls, started to be built even earlier, before these dates. The documentary evidence appears later than the construction itself. This means we are not seeing the beginning of history. We are witnessing a moment when these spaces were already sufficiently obvious to appear in the records. What existed before this moment? The official history has no answer. When the same discrepancy occurs once, it is an anomaly. When it occurs 4 times in different locations on the map, it is a pattern. The official history refers to such systems as spontaneously developed infrastructure. It sounds convincing. Each person acts on their own initiative, and it just happened to turn out this way. Try to test this version against one detail. Spontaneous growth is when each subsequent builder does things a little differently than the previous one. Different solutions, different mistakes, different scales. In Nuremberg, the columns of the lower tier had to align with the axes of the upper tier through 3 generations of builders, and they did align. In Mendig, the spacing between columns varied among different workers over different decades, but still resulted in an almost correct grid. In Oppenheim, the oval profile of the tunnels was maintained over 40 kilometers. Spontaneous growth doesn't work that way. Standards are what make it work. And standards are someone's design, not someone's coincidence. In Bamberg, the walls of the tunnels bear marks from pickaxes dating back to the 11th to 15th centuries. The first documented reference is from the year 1487. This indicates that the system existed for at least several centuries before it was recorded. There is no official answer to who worked here before the documents were made. In Oppenheim, some tunnels are still not mapped. After the fire of 1889, when the city was rebuilt according to a new plan, some entrances were accidentally sealed off. New houses were built in different locations. The system continues to exist where no one is looking for it. The collapse of 1983 was no exception. It serves as a reminder that beneath the city lies something that has been forgotten. Everywhere there is the same gap. The first documentary evidence appears later than the system itself. This is not a peculiarity of archival storage. It means that they documented an already existing entity and only documented the part that could be explained. The rest did not make it into the records. Ask one technical question that almost no one asks. How did a uniform construction standard emerge in 4 different jurisdictions? In Imperial Nuremberg, in Rhenish Oppenheim, in Episcopal Bamberg, and in the small town of Mendig. These cities had no unified administration, no unified legislation, no unified architectural authority. Yet everywhere, the same principle of excessive scale. Either it's a coincidence that happened 4 times, or someone was working across jurisdictions, above city councils, above bishops, above market law. Who exactly had such authority in medieval Europe is an open question. But the authority was clearly there. It's not about beer. It never was about beer. Perhaps the official version, beer cellars, storage facilities, abrasive sand, represents not an intentional lie. It might be a good faith description of a final function, the one that systems performed when their builders had already departed, and the documents regarding their original purpose no longer existed. New users saw the completed spaces and explained them through what they understood: storage, shelter, extraction. But this does not explain their origin. It explains their use. The distinction is fundamental. Now another question. Not who built this, but for what kind of life? What had to happen underground to necessitate a system with autonomous water extraction, parallel movement routes, and a capacity twice that of surface calculations? Mines in residential courtyards, wells on the lower levels, quarantine chambers, transport rails. This is not a storage facility for perishable goods. This is an environment designed for autonomous existence underground, for a long time, under any conditions above. The next question is more difficult. Who had the authority to create pathways beneath other people's properties without asking for permission? To establish a uniform construction standard in several cities that were in different jurisdictions? To finance 70 meters of tunneling beneath a city where there was not a single mine? In medieval Europe, such power did not belong to the city council or the Brewers' Guild. It was something above that. And lastly, in none of these 4 cities is there a document that describes the system as a whole. No diagrams, no orders, no explanations of the scale. The Nuremberg Decree of 1380 has been preserved. It lies in the archives. This means that the archives here did not burn automatically. Thus, the absence of a document about the system is not a loss. It is a choice. Someone decided that such a paper should not exist. A brewer who wants to preserve a barrel until winter does not dig 70 meters down. A merchant who hides goods from taxes does not build 40 kilometers of tunnels and does not hire Saxon miners. This is not a matter of private interest. Yet the explanation given operates at the level of private interest. That is precisely what is being offered to you. In none of these cities has the name of the architect survived. There are no names of the clients. The names of the builders of the cathedrals are sometimes preserved. The names of the military engineers of the fortresses are often found. However, the names of those who created the underground infrastructure beneath several German cities, at depths ranging from 20 to 70 meters, have not been preserved at all. They built. They knew what they were doing, and they left no signatures. And every time someone tried to explain why all of this was necessary, the same answer emerged: beer. It was all for the sake of beer. Does that answer satisfy you? Or is something about it off?